Hey guys, it's Wyvern here with a quick video to cover the incoming Waaagh update patch notes. Now, the Waaagh update is, especially on the campaign side of things, an absolutely massive patch. We're getting, of course, the new DLC units, the new DLC factions. The greenskins are getting a massive overhaul. And there's actually been several changes to the global map, as well as a lot of changes to other factions, buffs, improvements, especially to Teclis and Alariel. So in this video, we're going to try to blitz through it, cover most of those. I will be doing, or trying to do, a separate video covering the new greenskin campaign mechanics before the DLC drops on Thursday. Hopefully sometime tomorrow, but we will try to cover it in here in the patch notes as well, and so that way you guys can get a little bit of a glimpse of what's coming if you have not seen it already. And I can also pitch in some of my own thoughts and opinions on some of these changes, especially some of the balancing changes, which in some ways there's a few that I'm personally not that thrilled about. But either way, jumping right in, of course, Call to Waaagh, the highlight of this patch, is the fact that greenskins are getting a rework. First and foremost, they are now getting the faction-wide reputation resource. Before, the way Waaghs worked is that each army had its own fightiness meter, which charged up. Once that charged up, you could call up a Waaagh, and it was a second separate army that you'd get. Now, there's a global reputation meter, which builds up which builds up over the course of the game by fighting continuously, and it improves your greenskin faction globally, makes you much more effective, helps with things such as public order and that sort of thing. It's a very, very useful resource to have. Once you hit 100 reputation, you can then call a Waaagh. This grants this then allows you to choose if you want to do a Gork or Mork Waaagh. Right now, unfortunately, the Gork Waaagh is, quite frankly, just way better than the Mork Waaagh, since the Gork one buffs weapon strength for melee units and Mork buffs missile troops. And let's be honest, as greenskins, you're probably running a lot of melee. So, yeah, the Mork one's kind of useless at this point, unfortunately. But either way, you can target your enemy faction's capital city, and all the owned armies that you have will get additional troops attached to them. Now, initially, this is 5 troops, I believe, unless I guess you have less troops to begin with, unless you have an army of like 2 or 3 troops. But over time, the Waaagh armies will fill up with enough troops to match the number of troops your army had at the beginning of the Waaagh. So if your army started at 17 troops, your Waaagh will continuously increase until you reach 17 troops. And this is even if you purchase up to 20 troops, it will stay at 17. So regardless, it does give you a lot of stopping power. This Waaagh mob is going to support you in any battles you fight, with the exception of interceptions and ambushes. And it just really gives you a lot more oomph. Different legendary lords do get access to additional different units in their Waaagh mobs. I'm not entirely sure which units are. I think it's just the conventional orc units that you get in Waaghs, but each of the legendary lords has potential to get some different units, like trolls or idols of Gork or savage orcs, or I believe black orcs for Grimgor. There is some opportunity for unique units for the other sub factions, but regardless, you usually just get generic orc units. But this army will stick around with you until either you get eradicated or until you have completed the Waaagh, or the Waagh's finished after 20 turns, and then the mobs disperse, your reputation resets to 0, and you have to build it up all over again. However, you're not pressured to use up the reputation meter. If you feel like you'd be better off not having Waaghs, then, well, you can simply keep it around for the passive buffs. And otherwise, when you do call up the Waaagh, you don't have to worry about conquering your target city too soon and then your Waaagh dispersing within the space of a turn. Your Waaagh will stick around for the full 20 turns that it is active, which is really, really nice. Gives you a lot more staying power. It lets you snowball much more effectively in early game. So here you can see, to complete this Waaagh successfully, you do have to raise the targeted capital or capture it. Do keep in mind, you do have to own it. I believe, granted, this hasn't been an issue for me yet, but I believe you do have to. So take this with a grain of salt because I could be incorrect here, but I do believe you have to own it at the end of the Waaagh. This is not something I've tested yet. I haven't had the occurrence where I captured a place and then lost it in the 20 turns my Waaagh was active, so I could be wrong here, but I do believe that if you lose the targeted capital by the end of your Waaagh, even if you captured it before, you will be considered to have been defeated. Regardless, when you complete this, you, depending on how you do get a trophy based on whatever faction you were fighting. This can grant all sorts of different benefits, additional leadership in battles, that sort of some replenishment rate, that sort of thing. So some very useful trophies can be gathered over the course of time from completing these different Waaghs. And Waaghs, of course, will grant some reputation themselves, so that's kind of useful. You're never really completely out of reputation. And you might also get some special Waaagh units at the end of your Waaagh as well, which is pretty cool. Right now, Waaagh is going to help Greenskins so much in the campaign. It's going to make him... Before, Greenskins were kind of a derpy and weaker faction. I think this is going to spike them up a huge amount alongside the Waaagh Battlefield battle ability rework and the Waaagh Confederation. It's going to be very easy to snowball out of control with Greenskins. And if you're playing on a lower difficulty, I could see it being incredibly easy to Green Tide. On very hard and legendary, the upkeep penalties are probably going to hold you back, but it's still going to be a lot easier than it was before. Regardless, Confederation got reworked to work like Norska's. This has been a long time coming, or really should have been here ages ago. Good stuff. You can confederate other Greenskin factions by beating their leader. This is really powerful. It means you can basically guarantee getting a lot of settlements very quickly. If you can let another Greenskin Lord collect all those settlements, then beat the crap out of him and get his stuff, it works pretty nicely. And then finally, Waaagh, of course, did get, or I shouldn't say finally, but then Waaagh got reworked. Now you get it right off the bat. It is simply an army-wide ability that you get in battle. This means you can't block it out by sniping or debuffing or the Greenskin Lord's cooldowns. It also means that you get it right off the bat in campaign, which is huge. It means that in those early games with dwarves where your troops never had enough melee attack, they never had enough punch to claw their way through dwarves that were getting increasingly leveled up in skills, especially if you didn't have DLC to get the nasty skulkers or anything. Now you do have Waaagh, and you can charge it up multiple times. If you have a lot of melee troops, you can charge up a Waaagh. In my experience, about the first two Waaghs can be triggered within about the first minute to 2 minutes of a battle, which is just insane. And it gives you some significant benefits with that extra melee attack, the extra weapon strength. And of course, each legendary lord gets their own benefits as well, like regen for Grom, or, well, some healing for Grom, I should say. And Grimgor gets even more weapon strength, Scarsnik more missile damage, that sort of thing. But those aren't present in multiplayer battles, but the new Waaagh, I think, is definitely a huge boon on campaign, and you are going to have to watch out for it, because AI gets this as well. And facing a horde of AI melee greenskins when they are getting Waaaghed repeatedly is a terrifying sight, especially for a faction like Dwarves or High Elves with Eltharion, for example. You will get swarmed very easily, so you have to be very wary of that. Greenskin scrap is also hitting the field. You can upgrade different units with different amounts of scrap. Each unit in your army upgrades individually, and the upgrades are unique to each unit type. So Black Orcs, for example, can get a bonus versus large, a bonus versus infantry, or if you're Grimgor, you can get the Immortal's armor, which grants them more armor. Scarsnik gets a unique type of poison that does damage over time on his Night Gobos. Otherwise, they do have upgrades to their leadership as well as upgrades to their AP damage. And you've got similar unique skills that you can discover over the course of a campaign with scrap. So you can't upgrade units with scrap immediately besides the unique legendary lord scrap tech. It does take a bit of time. But since you need to unlock that scrap tech, the ability to do scrap in the tech tree. But at least now you have immediate access to the tech tree anyways, and you can get some of those early scrap techs very quickly. Now, Greenskin Legendary Lords, they've gotten some reworks, and of course this has already been highlighted a whole bunch by a lot of people. Of course, Grimgor now has Best of the Best. This lets him be a bit more competitive, and they also got some of their in-campaign skills reworked as well, and some of their in-campaign mechanics reworked. For example, and I'll try to touch upon a few of these, because some of them are not mentioned in these campaign balance changes down here. So First and foremost, the Grim War, we got Best of the Best, which is, of course, his new melee defense and ward save bonus when an enemy character is within, I believe, 30 meters. You're Next, which is basically a Hunter of Champions. It's very, very powerful and can help either Grim War or his friends kill something very quickly. And you have it right off the bat in campaign, so enemy lords don't stand a chance. And then Bloodforged Armor, which is a nice boost to Grim War survivability, helps him deal with mobs, that sort of thing. Azag's Art Armor, of course, more leadership and more melee defense and armor. Very useful to keep your troops alive and in the fight. Saga Slashes, more morale and more melee attack for nearby allies. Also good. If you can keep Azag in a fight, this is excellent. In campaign, I think this is going to be amazing. In multiplayer, it's a little harder because people pressure Azag out, but still very powerful. Both Skarsnik and the Night Goblin Warboss gets Fermented Fungi. This is a targeted debuff that can cause an enemy to rampage if you drop their HP low enough. Also lowers their melee defense. It is very powerful and can really mess up your opponent's day. If you catch some elite cav or a monster with it, it can be night, Sweet Prince for whatever it may be. Davos's Loons is also available from the Night Goblin Warboss. You do get some fanatics you can summon. Warboss now gets Smash 'em Faster. This is in multiplayer, but he also does, but this is also a skill that's at the end of the red line tree for all Greenskin Lords. So it's basically a fight or die. Goblin Great Shaman, don't even try it, which is essentially a budget Arcane Unforging that you get as a bound spell. Very powerful. And Goblin Big Boss gets They Need Stabbing, which allows you to debuff a targeted character, makes them easier to snipe. Stacks with Grimgors, You're Next. It's very, very nasty, very powerful. In multiplayer, it's super cheap right now because the Goblin Big Boss is so cheap. And in campaign, it can really help with that Lord sniping. I should mention there were also some changes made outside of the unique Waaaghs to some of the items and units that you start with. Grimgor, for example, his Immortals, who before it was just a slight skill buff or slight combat stat buff to his Black Orcs. Now the Immortals banner actually makes his Immortals immortal. They cannot lose models as long as their leadership stays above 50%. Given the fact that they are probably sitting near Grimgor and the fact that their leadership is probably very high, especially early game when they're fighting a bunch of trash orcs and dwarves, and the Immortals are literally unkillable. I've had games where they were down to like 2,000 HP. They were still fighting strong. They had not lost a single model. So that is a huge change from the campaign side of things. I'll certainly try to highlight it in tomorrow's campaign video. But just something to keep in mind that there's been other improvements made as well. Now, in the campaign, there have been some balance changes made. The Grimgor now gets Goblin Shaman in the Ambush at Thundering Falls. He does get some new abilities in the skill tree. Azag obviously got moved to a new faction. A star at Karak Ungor. He's the big changes here. And I'm not going to cover the unique skills here really, but he does get a new unique building in Nagashazar. He does get plus 40 relations bonus with Vampire Count factions, which matters a lot more now than it did before because he actually starts close to Vampire Counts. And the first part of his Death Magic line no longer requires the Crown of Sorcery. This is huge in my opinion because before you were locked out of Death Magic with Azag until you got the Crown of Sorcery, which was a Warhammer 1 quest battle, and in my opinion, Warhammer 1 quest battles could be much more difficult. This was one of the really bad ones from Warhammer 1 that was incredibly tough. You could, unless you cheesed like super hard, even then it could be very tough. You basically needed fairly high tier troops to complete the Crown of Sorcery quest. So this was a very difficult battle, and the fact that you often wouldn't get your Death Magic until way late in the game, which meant you either have to stockpile points for it or just say screw it and never pick up Death Magic. But this is going to help there because now you don't have to worry about it. You get Death Magic right away. Wurtzag, jungles and deserts are now suitable. Frozen is uninhabitable, so some slight shifts there in what is adequate for him. And Wurtzag's vigorous dancing skills can't make up for his lack of clothing. That's quite shocking. Who would have guessed? But he does get some new unique skills, and his army start is a little different. There were some slightly different army starts just to get those early game battles going, which before you might not have been able to get or would have been a little difficult to take. Skarsnik, same thing. He gets some new unique skills. The Drip and Tips upgrade got changed, or skill got changed from being poison to now granting him his unique poison mechanic that he also gives his Night Goblins. And now the raiding camp stance is something you can just enter with no movement points. This is similar to Norska. It'll make the orcs much more mobile on the field and make raiding camp something you want to be doing all the time. Besides that, there have been a whole bunch of quality of life changes. There's going to been a bunch of territory changes. There have been areas. There have been regions added, such as the Marshes of Madness. New factions have been added, including a lot of new Skaven factions. The Dwarfs of Clan Helheim, who are the starting opponents of Imrik, and Skullcrag is now occupied by now occupies the Misty Mountain. There's also new landmarks, so a bunch of little changes here. These are all landmarks that you will find in Imrik's starting cities, so or near Darkhold, I guess, is the first city you capture as Imrik. But these are all cities are all landmarks you'll find very quickly. All provide some pretty nifty benefits, so definitely be on the lookout for these. They can be very, very beneficial. And also some added regions, mostly to flesh out, because the area is now occupied by the new legendary lords. Ivres, of course, got fleshed out to make it more useful for Eltharion. Some additional ports were added to the Dragon Isles, that sort of thing. So there were a few campaign balance changes as well for both Alarielle as well as Teclis in particular, as well as some influence rebalancing. You can now get influence from the release captives mechanic for post-battle choice, for example, which is pretty strong. But Alarielle now gets a regeneration on her Greater Invocation of Isha, which is pretty cool. She also, with the Rite of Lilith, also gets you some increased, so it gets you some unique abilities, reduces some cooldowns on all your spells, and gets you some more magic item drop chain. So she's had some reworks for some of her rights. The Alarielle's Power of Nature bundle now grants a +1 influence per turn for each region under its effects, which is going to make her campaign, I think, a lot easier. And now her Intrigue Court's actions are even cheaper. So I think Alarielle is going to be much easier than she was before, and I already considered her to be a pretty darn easy campaign. Teclis is getting reduced recruiting costs for Phoenixes and Swordmasters, which is kind of like whatever. He does get diplomatic relation bonus, though, with Wood Elves, Lizards, and Dwarves. Surprisingly, no Empire, which I'm actually kind of surprised by. Because he does go to the Empire to help them learn magic. You'd think he'd get relations benefits with them, or maybe he was so unlikable they kicked him out, but still, that's a bit surprising. He now starts with a Lore Master hero in the campaign, which is huge. It gives Teclis a little bit more fightiness and a little bit more combat capability. Before he started with a mage, so that was not as good for him. But now he gets a Lore Master right away. He gets +5 recruit rank to Lore Masters and Archmages, and now not all his skills don't apply faction wide. Archmages get their own sort of cost reductions to spells and that sort of thing. There's also been some unit unlock changes. You can now get archers with light armor right off the bat at tier 1 in the barracks. Shadow Warriors recruitment time was reduced, which is nice. I still don't think they're a great unit most of the time in campaign, unless you really want to be like a sweaty tryhard with kite builds. I think you're going to be better off just spamming Loth and Seaguard most of the time, but it definitely is a nice perk there. Spearmen and basic archers now available on the tier 1 building of the settlement chain, which is really nice. Gets you a cheap army quickly, and you don't have to invest in a barracks. Every elf army now can be built without investing in a barracks, which is awesome. A few changes for some other factions. The Tomb King Barracks grants an additional 2 capacity for Necron Warriors at tier 3. I think that's nice. Incentivizes that infantry a little bit more. Now Ungrim has a unique passive skill which prevents Slayers from dying until they lose 50% of their HP, which is pretty nuts. Makes them much beefier and much more of a useful unit in his army, because you don't have to worry about having to replenish at all. You just have to keep them above 50% HP. So really, really strong there. Blood Voyage for Hellebron, Army-wide Frenzy, some slight changes. Miners now don't get missile unit bonuses, that sort of thing. But nothing really too crazy there. Now, there were some contact effects that were changed. Strider now allows you to ignore all downsides for fighting uphill. for walking over hills. It lets you pass through trees. Units don't tire quicker when moving up slopes, that sort of thing. So a bunch of the hidden downsides to moving around are now removed by Strider, which is really nice. Woodsman was added as well, which is basically Strider, but only in the woods. And this is available to all Wood Elf and Beastman units, as well as the White Lions, Alistair the White Lion, Wolfheart, Huntsman, Huntsman General, and the Amber Wizard. So a few units from other factions get it as well. And we also now get Strider on a lot more units that we didn't have before. Skin Wolves, Norscan Ice Wolves, Dire Wolves, Warhounds, the Claw of Nagash, all the various assassin units for the Skaven now all get Strider. And you might think this isn't too important, but it actually matters a lot, especially on some of these wolf units. It now means you're going to, and hound units, you're now going to be able to catch like skirmish cavalry a lot more easily, because you're going to be, if you run them through terrain or some place where they are getting snared and they're getting slowed, that means your Norscan Warhounds can now catch them, get that poison effect going, then that unit can't escape. So I think this is actually a huge buff to these units. Certainly far greater than one would think just by glancing over it. There's also been some changes to ammo consumption, which previously units would consume all their ammo that they were, even if their burst was interrupted. So this has now been undone. It applies to a whole bunch of units that fire and burst. So here you have a list of them. Some changes to splash damage. So splash damage isn't as punishing. Before this patch, splash damage was kind of overtuned and busted. So I think that's definitely good to see. Bug fixes, not going over those. If you guys would like to check these fixes out, feel free to do so. I will be leaving a link down in the description below. But yeah, I'm not going to go over every single bug fix here. You can give your Black-Arc Admiral sort of cane, for example. Yeah, there's a whole lot of there's a lot of bug fixes. So I'm not going to go through all of those. You guys are free to do so. There have been some fixes for battles as well, where I guess Dirk and Squigs counted as melee infantry. No more instances of Guardian stacking, stuff like that. Ammo counts taking account burst size, which is the aforementioned fix. Depth guard no longer dismembering, small stuff like that. And then some multiplayer changes as well, fixing instances of Chaos Invasion not occurring. If you implement unit caps, you can no longer use campaign exclusive units. It's essentially just like quick match, stuff like that. Some small quality of life changes. But besides that, really, there's just been a bunch of small quality of life changes, and while there are definitely some nifty stuff in there, it's nothing of massive game-changing value. For unit balancing, bug fixes, some RORs were tweaked so that they actually matched up with their correctly with their rank 9 counterparts. Nothing too crazy here. Ekron Miners went up to 27 melee attack. This is probably because they carried over the original tier 9 or veteran C9 melee attack, and it was never fixed, I would assume. Tattersouls get +1. A lot of +1 melee attacks and melee defenses here. Some fixed reload times for a few mammoths. And monsters like the Dread Saurian. More leadership for the Rusty Arrows, which I think is cool. That's going to make them stick around a lot longer, which is really strong of that unit, which is already pretty good. And some pluralization changes. And some visual improvements, but nothing too crazy there. But for unit changes, and this is really what I want to get into because this is the stuff I really like talking about. For Beastmen, Razor Gore Chariots went down in price. I'm not sure I agree with this. I think Razor Gores were pretty fairly priced to begin with. Certainly 1,000 gold is going to make them even more popular than they were, but I don't think they really deserve a price cut. I think 1,100 was fine, and while I don't think 1,000 will make them OP, it will make them much more impressive against dwarves, and I'm not sure this is something they deserved. Razor Gore Herd has gone up in cost. I do think this is fair. It was a unit that for a long time was underpowered and undervalued. I myself was one of the people who heavily undervalued it until it was brought to my attention how strong it is. And turns out it's actually a really strong unit. At 550 it was underpriced for sure. 600 makes it a bit more balanced. Minotaurs with shields lost 1 melee defense, which is kind of a joke. Same thing with Butchers of Kalkengard. Makes very little, in my opinion, functional difference, but it does nerf probably the most useful Minotaur variant still. So, and I think that's fair. Minotaurs with shields are probably a bit underpriced nowadays. For Bretonnia, Questing Knights got melee defense buff. Because, you know, the unit that Bretonnia needs to get a buff is Questing Knights. Honestly, so these are some out-of-touch changes. I do agree that Companions of Canel needed a nerf to their cost. Their cost is too damn low, and I think it still is too damn low. 1550, this unit should be like at least 1600, probably 1700 gold. When one considers its actual combat stats against other units. The melee to defense buff is stupid. There's no reason Questing Knights should be getting this. They're already an excellent unit. I would argue that for their cost, they're overtuned. They're already a unit that Bretonnia crushes on hard. Bretonnia has a lot of other units that do need buffs. And I understand. I don't necessarily mind Questing Knights being a little overtuned for their cost, because I understand I play a lot of Bretonnia. Bretonnia has a lot of weaknesses and faction issues that they need compensation for with slightly better units in the Cav category. But there's a lot of crap units on the Bretonnian roster that need fixes desperately, and this is not helping any of them. So this is just kind of why. Why buff the one unit that's already overtuned and already performing excellently instead of fixing Mounted Yeoman, the Blessed Field Trebuchet, the Bretonnian Lord, or improving the Bretonnian Paladin? Why not make the Grail Relic actually useful? There's so many changes that could be implemented here, and instead it's being wasted giving +1 melee defense to Questing Knights. Like, what the heck? Green Knight got a cost cut. Nice, but I don't think it solves his issue of getting body blocked too easily. Pegasus Knights got a boost to melee attack and into large. I think that's decent. Pegasus Knights honestly weren't a bad unit before. I think this will make them a little bit more competitive, but I don't think it's really going to push them up into a super competitive tier. Most of the time, you're going to run other units in Bretonnia. The fact is, these guys are just not very good against infantry, and that makes it tough to use them. They tend to get bogged down very easily. But I do think it's fair that they get a slight tweak. They're going to be fair for their price. For Dark Elves, the Scourge Runners and Ravagers of Rakarth can no longer hide. Or I guess Chariots in general can no longer hide. Now the Scourge Runner Chariots and Ravagers of Rakarth are added to the 360-degree fire cap, so that's pretty nifty. Some slight nerfs there, though, nothing too significant. Sister of Slaughter dropped melee defense from 59 to 57. I do not know what the logic behind this is. In my opinion, Sister of Slaughter are in a very good balancing spot right now. They're very flimsy, but they do shred and sustain melee. I think that's excellent. This is, I think, an unwarranted nerf, though it's not a huge one. I'm not a fan of that. Slaanesh Harvesters got a 50 gold nerf. I'm not sure this is fair. Honestly, I think Doomfire Warlock should get a buff in cost. More so than Slaanesh Harvesters should get a nerf. But, okay, 50 gold isn't too huge. Dark Shards are now cheaper by 25 for both variants. I think this is good. Dark Shards are a pretty rare unit, and it's tough for Dark Elves to get the width they need to protect them. Maybe not as hard as it is for other factions, but it's certainly, actually, it's more difficult for Dark Elves than a lot of other factions. So you don't see Dark Shards very often, and I do like this slight tweak. The Bloodrack Medusa is now a bit better melee attack, which I think is good. Bloodrack's a bit undertuned, might still be after this. Malekith lost some physical resist on Seraphon. Excellent change in my opinion. Maybe he should even lose even more, because 15% is still pretty nuts. When it stacks with 25% missile resist that he gets from scaly armor, so it's pretty insane. In my opinion, Malekith is definitely a bit too beefy currently, and he'll still be too beefy for this, but at least less so. Charybdis got more HP and it's now cheaper. I think that's a good buff, though I'm not sure it's going to make it much more competitive. I definitely do like that buff there. Maybe we'll see it a little more as that anti-large monster it should be. The Dwarves, Flame Cannon got cheaper by 50. This is kind of a joke. I don't see the point. You're still never going to bring a Flame Cannon because you got to pay the cannon tax to protect yourself from counter battery, and the unit's still grossly too expensive for what it does. It's got one niche purpose of destroying infantry, and while it does that very well, it doesn't help you versus large, which is your main problem. Rangers with great weapons got more ammo. Cool. I don't agree with this because I think it's the wrong way to go fixing throwing axes in general. These units suck as a missile unit because their projectile velocity is trash, their range is trash. They tend to get overrun in melee anyway. This does reward you a little more if you don't get overrun, but in my opinion, it would be better if these guys were hybrid melee shooting units instead. Gyro Bomber now suppresses, which is excellent. I think it's going to make Gyro Bomber a lot more useful, so I'm definitely excited to see that. And I think it's the one really good change here for the Dwarves that should help them a bunch. And hopefully bring a unit that they don't use very often into the light a little bit more. For the Empire, the General Griffin got a little cheaper. Nothing too crazy there. Boris Todbringer gained Blood Roar. You might be wondering, is that going to be OP with Crush the Weak? The answer is no, because Crush the Weak lost its leadership debuff. That's mentioned further down in the patch notes. I've already read through the patch notes, so I wouldn't be like stuttering over myself here. But he does get, he does, Crush the Weak got buffed. Or Crush the Weak got nerfed. So Blood Roar is no longer stacking. You're not getting -12 leadership on Boris. It's just my save for Blood Roar. I guess it's a consistency fix. It does make Empire Terror Bombing a little harder, but it's okay. Crossbowmen are a little cheaper. Not sure this was warranted. I think crossbows were fine cost-wise. It's not going to make them overpowered, but I don't think this was a deserved buff. Hellblasters and Hellstorms got a price cut of 50. I don't think it's going to make Hellstorms popular. Hellblasters maybe a little bit more so. Reichsguard got +1 melee defense, which helps quite a bit. Makes them a bit beefier in sustained melee. But nothing too crazy once again. These are all slight tweaks that, whether good or bad or inadequate, are not going to shift things too much, in my opinion. In my personal opinion, I'd like to see Reichsguard either get immunity psychology or get a more significant boost to melee defense to make them more different or distinct from Knights of Blazing Sun. Right now, they're basically just a less punchy version, which means that players with good micro will use Knights of Blazing Sun 90% of the time. War Wagons, though, got some massive buffs, and I'm going to be blunt. I don't agree with some of these. The War Wagons getting more missile damage, I think, is great. I think it gives them... it wasn't the buff I was hoping for. I think they still compete very heavily with Outriders. But I do think that you're going to have some potential for some abusive kiting builds now with the War Wagon. Now, when I say abusive, it shouldn't be too abusive because your speed's only 50 and you're still only Empire, who's kind of easy to overrun. But it means that they're actually a threat, rather than just a joke that you ignore and then a kill at your leisure at the end of the game. War Wagons with Mortars got 6 more ammo and 40 more range. I think this is a massive, massive mistake. War Wagons with Mortars were already in a solid spot, in my opinion. They were not an amazing unit. They were a side grade of an incredibly niche unit. Mortars are not a popular unit. They're not great in a lot of matchups. War Wagons with Mortars, obviously, we're not going to be great in a lot of matchups. I do think that a little more ammo was a good move. They could have used like 2 more ammo. Certainly not +6. And they definitely don't deserve 380 range, because this is going to make kiting with them against factions that rely on bolt throwers and stuff much more easy. Against a faction like High Elves now, that you can kind of kite away from bolt throwers. You can bombard their front line and not worry about bolt throwers, which is insane. So I think this is a bit of an overbuff. I think these guys should have gotten just the ammo increase, and that's it. Luminarch of Ash is a little beefier. Who cares? It's a Luminarch. It's a very niche meme unit, so you almost never see it. Massive changes for greenskins, of course. Cost hikes for Warboss. Cost hikes for Scarsnake, Wordsag, which is surprising. Wordsag, I think, was fairly priced. I don't think he really deserves the cost hike, but he got it. Azag, I assume this bakes in the WoW. Yeah, this is baking in the WoW ability, so that's increased. They're increasing the lord prices for all of these guys, yeah, nothing to be said there, really. Black Orcs get their colors overridden. They're now all black in actual black armor. You now get Vanguard deployment on Scarsnake, and then I got Warboss. This has been a long time coming. I'm glad to see it. Grimgor's bigger now. Scarsnake is a little faster and does a little more damage, so that's nifty. Azak is now way beefier in melee on a Skullmuncher, which is awesome. The 24 melee defense has been a bit of a joke for a long time, so going up to 32 is excellent, I think. Arachnox Spider is now down to 120 armor. This is not something... Now, this is something I'm not sure if they will patch before the DLC drops, but the Arachnox Spider mount for the Goblin Great Shaman is actually has 150 armor. And so I'm not sure if this is going to get changed, but it is something worth keeping in mind that weirdly enough, these Arachnox only have 120 armor, but the Lord Mount one has 150 still. The HP is increased. So that's going to make the Ragnarok more useful against factions that rely on AP missiles, like the Empire, for example, or maybe even Dwarves or the Empire Coast. But it is going to make it less useful versus factions like Bretonnia or High Elves, who traditionally struggle more with getting AP missiles on the field. Night Goblin Fanatics got a price hike with the changes to their skills. This makes them, in my opinion, grossly underpriced. Well, Night Goblin Archers kind of suck, in my opinion, anyway. But the Night Goblin Fanatics and AP Clunies in particular are now grossly underpriced, especially with how powerful the new Fanatics are. I think AP Clunies especially are just insane. Night Goblin Squig Hoppers got some slight buffs to melee attack. Death Creepers got a little cheaper Moon Howlers, more expensive Doom Divers. I think all these price changes are warranted, and these little tweaks are fine. Nothing crazy OP. It makes these units a little better or a little worse, but I don't think it's going to be massively meta shifting or break anything. It's just make it a little harder to get all the units you want if you're getting a super wonderful unit like a Doom Diver, or help you squeeze in the Moon Howlers if you want them. Boar Boys, though, all got a 10 armor buff, which is pretty significant. You now get 100 armor on the Regiment round, Broken Tusk Mob. Not sure I agree with this. I think Boar Boy Big Guns were nice at their sweet spot of 75 armor. I think that was decent I think that was a good amount of armor without being too much. I do think the Broken Tusk Mob needed that 100 armor. That's certainly fine. But I'm not sure I agree with the armor buffs to Boar Boys and Boar Boy Big Guns, because they were already decent after the last patch. Now, there were some bug fixes made to the chariots, where High Elf chariots would attack units in front of them. The character inside would attack units in front of them, giving the unit far more damage than it should, especially against single entities. So this was fixed. You, of course, do get new mages. The Fire Mage gets a Sun Dragon mount, much like the Amber Wizard for Empire gets a Griffin. The High Elf Fire Mage gets a Sun Dragon to represent a Fire Mage or a Dragon Mage, which is awesome. Definitely excited to see that. And obviously, I'm hyped to see all the new lores. New mounts. You know, get a White Lion Chariot mount for Alistair. Arcane Phoenix for Teclis. Which I still don't understand. I think this is an incredibly stupid move, but that's been done. Don't even get me started on it. I absolutely hate this addition. Teclis should not be fighting, and he should not be a fighty character. And making him a fighty character with Arcane Phoenix is just dumb in my opinion, but what can I say? It's been added. And a Griffin mount. And I especially I wish it wasn't added in multiplayer. But what can you do? They also added a Griffin mount for the Prince and Princess, which I think is pretty cool. You no longer get martial prowess on an eagle, so that's a slight balancing tweak there. Princes and handmaidens can now hire 360 when on foot, which is cool. Nobles a little cheaper. Or sorry, Nobles a little pricier, which I think is a mistake. Great Eagle's already not popular as is. You don't bring it ever, so I don't know why you make it pricier. Tyrion gets Martial Mastery, nice buff to his combat stats. Not what he needs really. I think Tyrion needs stuff to get out of combat, not and be able to reposition where he needs to, not stuff to make him even fightier than he already is. But what can you do? This is another one I'm really not a fan of. And actually, there's a few here that I'm not a huge not a fan of. These next three, I guess. White Lions got a buff to HP, buff to melee defense, lost a little bit of charge bonus. I absolutely hate the change because it doesn't come with a price hike. White Lions at 800 gold were a very well balanced unit. They were not amazing. They were not terrible. They were in a good spot. This is just a gross overbuff. You get 150 more HP on the whole unit. You get 4 more melee defense, which is insane. It basically makes them better than Empire Greatswords while costing 100 less gold. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I don't mind White Lions being more elite. I don't mind them being a better combat unit, especially now that Silver and Spears are filling in that mid-tier role a little bit and helping them out, as well as the Rangers helping them out a little bit. So they're no longer that cheap, fighty crutch for the High Elves. But I absolutely hate the notion that they're getting free buffs when the unit was already very well balanced. It's, in my opinion, just stupid, and there's no other two ways around it. Illyrian Reavers, similar thing. They're already an archer unit in an excellent balancing spot, in my opinion. Very good in combat. Yes, their damage output, given how much they cost, their range damage output was not very good, but their melee stats were excellent, and they had very good range. So that's just sacrifices you make. I think for this at 750 gold, these guys were very fairly priced. 700, I think, is an undeserved buff. The buffs to the Heralds of the Wind, I think, are fair. These guys were a little underused, and their melee defense was lower than traditional Illyrian Reavers, which they were supposed to match. So I like these little buffs there. For Lizards, Ripperdactyls are a little beefier. Who really cares? I don't think this is a huge difference, but cool to see, I guess. Same thing for Norsca here with the Frostworm. Skinwolf Werkin was made a little cheaper. Here's an ability I don't necessarily agree with, and that's the War Mammoth changes. The War Mammoth went down in cost from 2200, which I already to 2100, which I always think is questionable. The War Mammoth Shrine went from 2300 to 2100. This I think is very, very bad. The reason for that is because you get Encourage, you get the AoE, you get the Giver of Glory, and you get the AoE leadership buff. So War Mammoth War Shrine is just objectively far better than a War Mammoth now, because the only thing you really lose is the missile attack, and I think a tiny bit of HP. Who cares about? So why would you ever bring a War Mammoth over War Shrine? It's just dumb. I don't get it. So I think this was a huge, huge mistake here. The War Mammoth War Shrine should definitely be more expensive than a War Mammoth. Skaven Plague Monks got a little beefier, more melee defense. Stormmen with Halberds got a little more melee attack. Some nice little tweaks to slightly underpowered units maybe, but nothing too crazy, so I think it's fair. Poison Wind Mortars, slight nerf to their damage output. Nothing too crazy there. The accuracy buff is actually going to make them worse, I think, because you're not scattering over multiple units as much anymore. The Tomb Kings now get their late Streets of Shadows in the campaign exclusive section. Nehekar Warriors got a slight increase to their melee defense. Sphinx of Usef, slight increase to leadership. Necropolis Knights got significant buffs. They've gone down in price. They've got much better combat stats. I think that is fair. I think it's well deserved. The unit was not particularly outstanding, so I think this is hopefully going to make them a little better. For Vampire Corpse, Coast, some disgusting buffs here that they absolutely don't deserve. All deck droppers, except the pistol variant, got a price cut. The bombers I don't necessarily mind. I think they're a little undertuned. But deck dropper handguns getting a price cut is, in my opinion, just stupid. Why? They don't deserve it at all. The unit is in a really good spot right now. Same thing with Rotting Prometheans. The unit is well balanced. The fact is, the other units on the Vampire Coast roster are disgusting and overtuned. Not these guys. Not this. Not this. These units are fine. They're not used, or they're not as good because everything else on the Vampire Coast roster is so fucking OP. The handguns are still underpriced after over a year and a half now since release. The bomb deck drop of the handgun or the gunnery mob bombers are still grossly overtuned. Zombie polearms are disgustingly good. The Rotting Prometheans and Morngulls, or Rotting Promethean gunnery mob and Morngulls, are still stupidly good. There's a lot of amazing units on the Vampire Coast roster that are just grossly overtuned, that are still not nerfed, and so a lot of units just don't see as much use. These guys don't need nerfs, or don't need buffs. If there's any unit that needs a buff, it's the Bloated Corpse and the Halberd variant of Depth Guard, and that's about it. So this is just terrible, in my opinion. Vargeist, slight upward tweaks to melee defense, not super relevant in my opinion. Just gonna gloss over that. Terrorgeist got a massive change. It's now a true it's now closer to a dragon in combat stats. It lost some of its anti-large, but just gained a flat bonus to its melee attack. Lost 10, plus 10. So it's better against more targets, but it is a little pricier. I like this change. I think it makes the Terrorgeist a little more versatile, a little more flexible, and I don't have a problem with it at all. And that similar change gets transferred to the Strigoi, Ghoul King, and Vampire Lord. So, though not necessarily to the same degree, but still very cool to see. For Chaos, we do see a leadership buff to the Sorcerer Lord, which I think is nice. Chaos Trolls are a little cheaper, or Chaos Trolls and Armor are a little cheaper, which I think is fair. The Hellken is a little beefier, making it harder to snipe, and is a little more precise. And now Demon Spew hit a little harder with AP, but they attack slower. I don't think this is deserved, but Forsaken aren't that great to begin with. I guess this is probably like evening it out with normal Forsaken. I'm not entirely sure. It's something I didn't check, but yeah, I'm not sure this was deserved. Dryads got more melee defense, which is nice. Treekin got +1 melee attack, which is nice, but not anything huge and game changing, and probably not the tweaks you really need. Now, there's been a removal of some friendly fire, or no friendly fire rules on some of these missiles, so that's been changed now. There you go. It's been changed. A little list of stuff that doesn't do friendly fire now. Now you can cast units if your army is 20 at max 20 units. Now you can summon, so that's a nice fix in my opinion. Now you're also going to always get a static amount of Winds of Magic in Quick Battle, which I'm incredibly fond of. I really like that change. I know some people are going to be sad that it's not as random anymore or that it's unpredictable, but personally I think from multiplayer, which is supposed to be a more competitive mode, the fact that there's some spells you always want to get off immediately, especially stealth spells, so the fact that you can now know that, okay, I'm going to have 15 winds of magic that I can use is, I think, a good choice. Now, I think good choice. And spell rebalance. Flesh to Stone is a little cheaper. This is to bring it in line with the Glittering Cloak, I believe, on Lord Metal. Wind Blast got nerfed a bit, which is good. Definitely deserved. It's still an incredibly potent spell. Brain Bursta, slight nerf there. Occam's Mind Razor made it a little cheaper, which I'm a big fan of. I really like this spell already, so making it a little bit cheaper is going to make it a little more usable, which I think is cool. Warp Lightning, slight nerf to make it a little less overtuned. Savage Dominion got more expensive, and the Summon Cygor now lasts a tiny bit longer. I think this is a fair change, and hopefully makes spamming these summons less common. Vermintide is now reduced to just 5 summons. Transformation of Kadon, it's a little pricier. So the Beastmen triple summon builds will hopefully be tougher to pull off. Because now you need over 60 Winds of Magic to get all of this off, which is, well, that's a decent penalty. As mentioned before, Boris Todbrigger's Crush the Weak got changed. It's now cheaper, but doesn't do the leadership debuff. Sister of Avalorn Banner got fixed to display correctly. Felix's heal now only affects himself and one other character rather than everything around, or all characters around him. So good nerf there. The huge change, of course, was the loonies, which now are targetable like a wind spell, makes them insanely powerful, probably overpowered. I'm expecting them to get a nerf soon, but definitely makes them much more usable. So I like the greater usability. I do not like the fact that they're now overtuned, especially the AP loonies. So the Mad Moon now grants extra anti-large and damage, which I think is cool. I kind of miss losing the Mimi abilities with meme potential with the original Spite of the Bad Moon, but with the extra missile block. But this is definitely a more useful buff. And finally, we do have the Sword of Teclis, which got changed from a combat ability to more Winds of Magic and regen. So gives him Winds of Magic regen, I should say. So it gives you a lot more Winds of Magic. And a Lithanar and Ix's Triad's Doppelgangers now have less mass and are spawned at the same HP as their parent unit. So that way they can't be used as an improvised net, but they also act better as a decoy. So there you go. The big changes. And there have been some there has been some stuff implemented from the Proving Grounds as well. Some improvements to AI construction, some improvements or some changes to starting diplomacy. So that's pretty cool to see. I would like to see some changes made to the upkeep that were tested there, that sort of thing, but it seems that's not the case. Regardless, going back over all this quickly, I love the changes to campaign. I think they're wonderful. I honestly have no complaints about those at all. I'm thrilled with the changes to Greenskins. I'm thrilled with the changes to campaign. Multiplayer changes, I like some of this consistency changes made. I'm very unhappy about some of the other changes. I think some of them are completely missing the point with certain factions. Like, why the heck are Questing Knights getting a buff when Bretonnia has multiple units that are just trash and desperately need buffs? And Questing Knights are like one of the only overtuned units on that roster. Some of these tiny, minute changes when factions need much greater overhauls, really, like the case of Dwarves. I get that it's not the Dwarf overhaul, but you can still give them a little more love. A lot of these sort of minute or like fairly irrelevant tweaks that are being added, and then are buffs to units that are already in a very good balancing spot. I'm just not a fan at all. But there's some buffs that are also good. I like the greater consistency. Some of the small tweaks I think are good, and it will help sort of stabilize things a little bit. But there are some things in here that I'm just not at all fond of. So mixed opinions on the multiplayer. Super hyped for the single player. I think it's some excellent stuff there. But those are my 2 cents. Hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. Hopefully you found it informative. Of course, there will be more early access stuff coming in the near future. Got a lot of multiplayer battles, a lot of casts, some campaign content coming up, and hopefully we'll get all of that before the release. But I did want to cover these patch notes. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. As usual, leave your own thoughts, opinions, comments, critiques, all that down below. I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. Do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.